Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Portsmouth City Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Steve Pitt, leader of the City Council, and I will be the chair of this meeting. But a housekeeping before we get started. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery via the stairwells, not attempt to use the lifts, and please assemble by Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be recorded and broadcast on the website, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those explicitly stating that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they've finished. We've all read the reports, so officers, please just highlight any developments that have occurred since publication or key points that you wish to raise. We will now begin with some introductions. To my left.
Peter Webb, City Solicitor.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Chris Ward, Director of Finance and Resources.
Mark Webb, representing Portico's CFO.
Matthew Williamson, Cabinet Member for Community Wellbeing, Health and Care.
Kimberly Barrett, Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Greening the City.
Chris Atwell, Cabinet Member for Central Services and Chair. We're joined by Portsmouth Youth Club Youth Cabinet's Chair, Maya, this afternoon.
Dave Ashmore, and I help look after environmental services.
Andy Biddle, Director of Adult Social Care.
Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing and Tackling Homelessness.
I'm Lee Hunt. I'm the Cabinet Member for Community Safety, Parks and Open Spaces. Thank you.
Peter Candlish, Cabinet Member for Transport.
Hugh Mason, Cabinet Member for Planning Policy and City Development.
Claire Hardwick, Head of Private Sector Housing.
Sally Scattergood, Assistant Director of Housing.
Tom Southall, Assistant Director of Economy, Transport and Planning.
Matthew Evans, Head of Capital Investment.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Okay, that's everyone. We're also joined by Toby from the news today. Welcome, Toby. Have we any apologies for absence, members? I think we have apologies for slight lateness from Councillor Dorrington. Nobody else? No, okay. Any declarations of interest? There are none. Can we please approve the minutes of the previous meeting, which is the 24th of June? Everyone happy with those?
Agree.
Okay, thank you. Okay, item 4 on the agenda today is the Hampshire and Isle of Wight. Put my teeth back in. Hampshire and Isle of Wight Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust Council of Governors appointment. And James Harris, over to you. This, just for anybody watches regularly or listens in, then you may be aware that this is an item that was deferred from a previous meeting. James.
Thank you, Leader. I regret to inform I've not had any further contact from the Trust in respect of the requirements of the role, demands, etc. So I'm afraid I don't have any further updates to give. So it's a matter for Cabinet whether it wishes to make an appointment or to defer the item again.
No, my suggestion would be that the Cabinet specifically requests that the Chief Executive of the Council directly intervenes with the Trust, because this is ridiculous. How can you ask somebody to be on something, publish it on your website that they're supposed to have a representative, and then not communicate with them to enable them to appoint a representative? That seems completely ridiculous. So I'm happy for either Chris to pick it up in Natalie's absence and write a letter which he can liaise with you on. And I suggest that the letter should be co-signed by the relevant cabinet member. Matthew, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, just to clarify that, I did approach the Chief Exec of Hampshire Isle of Wight Community Foundation NHS Trust, who did contact me to say, please contact this person, which I then put James and the Chief Executive and gave them that information, but obviously we still have not had a response. So this is a little bit problematic, and I agree. I think taking a more strong-armed approach, because as I've mentioned before, I found out we were supposed to have a representative on the trust board entirely by accident. by saying that Portsmouth City Council has a representative and there's no appointment. So it is something that's really, for a foundation trust to do this, is poor. It's poor practice. Though it is understandable, bearing in mind we have never had a representative on this because this is a brand new trust and it's carried over from the old Southern Health, which we were not a part of.
Okay, so we kind of are where we are, but we need to give them another shove because it's just not on, frankly, because it makes us look like we're not fulfilling our responsibilities because they're advertising that we should have a representative on there and they're not giving us the ability to actually appoint one. And actually, to me, it's worse that we then appoint somebody and then they don't get invited to meetings or any copies of the minutes or anything else, at which case it looks like they're not doing their job properly. So I'm kind of protecting PCC from that situation right now. So thanks for coming in to update us, James, but we are going to continue with the same holding pattern we've had to date. Okay, item 5 on the agenda today is the exclusion of press and public. Now, as members will be aware, we try not to do that wherever we possibly can, but I do need to remind members that everything that's on Orange Papers is exempt from public discussion. Are members happy to proceed without excluding members of the press and public, but will avoid making any specific reference to anything on the Orange Papers? Is that okay? Okay, thank you very much indeed. In which case we can now move to item 6, which is the Portico Shipping Limited update. And I believe in Mike's absence, Chris Ward is going to give a report from Portsmouth City Council. But as people will be aware from the start of the meeting, we do have Mark and Steve here as well, if there are any questions relating to anything in the public papers. Chris.
Thank you, Leader. So just by way of key highlights then, because there's no update to the report itself, you'll recognise that the report itself is here for you to approve as shareholder, in your capacity obviously as shareholder for Portico Shipping Limited, and that's the budget for 25-26. Set out in Appendix A, as you will know, and it also draws your attention to the approved loan facility as well in the anticipated drawdown. I think important things to note in terms of the preparation of the budget itself are that it's been informed by a full independent review by external consultants. It's also been reviewed by the company advisory group, and they are the advisors to yourselves. It's based on known and expected future trade, but with also the anticipation or knowledge of potential risks around volatility of trade. It takes account of the land limitations that there are around Portico as well. That's important. But also important, the proposal or the budget proposal is consistent with the council's approved budget that you approved in February 2025. From your perspective, it's also important that you take this decision in the context of the overall future viability of Portico. So you need to understand what the future looks like in taking a short-term decision too. The 3-year business plan that's contained within the papers demonstrates an improving position, but ultimately, as I've alluded to, future profitability is constrained by land availability. I think that's all I'd like to say, Leader, but obviously we can between the three of us we can take questions.
And Chris, members' questions? Lee?
Yeah, thank you for that. Tell me, what happens, Mr. Ward, if and when local government reform comes about? Where does this, because it belongs to Portsmouth City Council, or rather we are the shareholder rather, where does it all go? And all the liabilities and any future profits, what would happen to that?
Well, the first thing to recognise is Portico itself is its own separate legal entity. So it would still exist as its separate legal entity. The role of the shareholder, of course, is to provide funding, but also to potentially receive dividends from the company itself. Just like the rest of everything to do with local government reorganisation and when new authorities are established, generally speaking, all of the assets and liabilities from the entities that then form the new entity all transfer. That's exactly the same situation as happened with the fire authority. If you remember, there were two fire authorities, one on the Isle of Wight and one on the mainland, and when that new combination arose, all of the assets and liabilities transferred on day one of operation, or vesting day as it's called.
And if I may, Leader, so then who become the shareholders? Right now it's Portsmouth City Council. Does it become so we put a lot of money there that way. Does that then become the property of the new local authority if it comes about? And does that mean, therefore, that the new owners aren't just Portsmouth residents, but they are residents from Gosport? If it were that way, they are residents from Gosport, Ferrum, and Havant. You get what I'm getting at.
Yeah, the new shareholder would be the cabinet of the new authority, which represents the wider area rather than just Portsmouth.
So one last stab then, Leader, if I may. So all those other places get the benefit of what we, the residents here, have done over such a long period of time, including saving Portico from disappearing.
They would receive all of the risks and rewards of the new entity.
You are correct, Councillor Hunt, without contributing a penny. And that's obviously not just Portico, but that's Portsmouth International Port as well.
And all of our property portfolio.
All of the commercial property portfolio, all of our property, yes.
Yeah, and that's about 30 million,
including Lakeside.
Yes, everything.
Any other questions or comments, Councillor Mason?
4.4 in the report. You're writing there about any opportunity to find port storage opportunities beyond the company's boundaries. With this, are you looking for additional space? And if so, what is the likelihood that you'll be able to find suitable additional space?
Thank you. It's a good question. Yes, we are currently looking at space. Just try and give you a bit of an example of where we are. So the logistics side of the business, which is consolidation within the port, 2 years ago, the revenue from that was about 2.4 million. This year, it's going to be about 7.8 million. We've actually now outgrown the port, so we are seriously considering how we move that off the port. We're looking for land all the way down the south coast between Portsmouth and Southampton. And we need about 4 acres of land to grow that business. Now, if we can get that land off-site, that would create more opportunities on-site for shipping cargoes, which you all know, and we've said it in many a conversation, that we've had to turn away probably £8 million worth of revenue over the last 3 or 4 years because we haven't had the land. So it's important that we move logistics off-site. So we're a victim, really, of our own success. For the business to grow, we have to move off-site. Now, it's proving difficult at the minute to find a site off-site. As I say, we've got a number of people looking for that. We will find somewhere. We have to make some compromise within that, but that's the only way that we're going to move the business forward. So if there's anybody on here that's got an area of land, we're now pleading for that. But we understand that land is very scarce, but we have to do it. We have to do it for not only for us, but for our owners as well, because we don't want to we can't afford to stagnate. So that's our future. Our future is moving logistics off-site to create more opportunities on-site through shipping.
Members, any more comments or questions?
Well, yeah, I'm really interested in what I've just heard because, as I understand, there'll be a shadow cabinet if and when this local government reform reorganisation happens. And the officer just said that, they need to move and they need to move quickly. But how confident are we that through all this turmoil of handing things over and a shadow cabinet, that they could move quickly? How would that be achieved if they spot something for, I don't know, £300,000-400,000 which they want to grab? We could do that, couldn't we? But if it's over £1 million soon, we won't be able to do much at all.
No, it might be helpful, Chris. Could you clarify? There's a discussion that's been happening about the limitations on spend on the existing Portsmouth unitary once the shadow authority is in place. Other places around the country, revenue spend, I believe, has been limited to £100,000 and capital to 1 million without additional sign-off from that shadow authority. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct, Leader. So there'll be some constraints, I think, and gateways to navigate through the shadow authority as and when we get there.
So to answer your question directly, Lee, if we're going to do anything significant, then we need to do it before May 2027, at which point our decision making will no longer be solely ours on any significant spend, and that is important for you guys to understand as well, because we will be shackled to the shadow authority at that point, as will potentially Fareham Gosport and Havant.
Yeah, if I could just round up then, I mean, we've had a very, as shareholder, we've had a progressive approach to Portico. And as shareholder, supporting it as much as we possibly can, we understand the value of the jobs and what goes on there and so on. And we're looking one day for profit. But it's true, isn't it? You know, if the new shadow cabinet, or sorry, if a new council comes in, they just, oh, there's too much trouble, and they could just like sell it off. Is that correct?
I don't believe that's correct for a shadow cabinet.
Pardon, I did qualify and say the new council.
A new local authority. A new local authority could do that.
They could sell off the port if they wanted to.
They could do, and if it were to be the case that they were going to inherit an enormous revenue gap on day one from Hampshire, which we now understand by 2028, 2029 will sit at £281 million, Chris, yes?
That's their latest forecast, yes.
That's their latest.
Well, they've gone down to 98 million or
Well, it
something.
depends which set of figures you look
Oh,
at.
my
The
goodness
county
me.
tend to change their figures on an almost daily basis because they measure them differently. It's not that the figure's not correct, but they change what they're talking about. But the figures that are now published show them with a structural revenue deficit in their revenue budget of £281 million, Toby, by 2028, 2029. 281 million. Those are published figures in the county's own report with their recommendation for the, quite frankly, insane three mainland unitary option, which this council and the other 12 partners that we're working with across Hampshire utterly reject. We've all been very clear about that. It is not a solution that any of us would support, but the figures are in that report, and they will also be in the Group of 12's report when it goes out. That is the gap by 2028, 2029. And yes, that does include an anticipated 4.99% rise in council tax and with the adult social care precept that year as well. So that's already taken into account. So that is it's a massive figure, and government yet again, as you know, I wrote to them fairly recently and said, what are you going to do about the revenue budget gap? And we were basically, in a nutshell, told to consume our own smoke, and it's our problem to solve. This is a government that is both blind and deaf, I'm afraid.
Forgive me, Leader, one last go. I know I said it, but that was completely whacked me. I mean, that's gone up a third then.
Yes, depending on which measure you look at.
Well, that's right. But the worst one I heard was 200 million. Now you say it's 200. And thank you very much indeed for keeping on top of this issue. I mean, daily you're in and out these meetings. We're enormously grateful for your commitment to understanding what's going on behalf of everybody. But that's a massive amount, isn't it? You know.
It's scary. It's very scary stuff.
Are they going to be allowed to put up their council tax this year, do you think? Or have you heard? Or the government going to squash them up?
Last year they wrote for what's called additional financial support, and it was rejected, I understand, Chris. That's right, isn't it? But the mad thing about all of this is the government uses the rationale, well, you've still got money left, so we're not going to let you do anything. So they are forcing local authorities to spend their reserves, pushing them closer to Section 114 territory, which is effectively the same thing as bankruptcy for a local authority, because a local authority can't legally go bankrupt. But it's the equivalent of that. And at that point, there is no money left. They're below the statutory reserves level that they should be retaining, and there's no money to fund anything, without a significant rise in council tax or without disposing of council assets like international ports and logistics companies, etc., that they may or may not own in order to solve that problem. In Southampton, they had to list a whole load of land and property and sell it off in order to fund themselves long enough to do a very dramatic transformation programme to review all their services. They have now done that. We will be in a very similar position. The county asked for additional financial support to enable them to do that transformation piece. The government said no. It is, I believe, anticipated that the county will repeat that request this year because they will have used another whole year's worth of reserves, something between 136 and 200 million pounds, while they're still trying to solve their ongoing revenue deficit. And therefore they will go to the government again. So we could see a very big hike in council tax in Hampshire next year. Not known, but it is definitely possible. And if we do, when you do council tax harmonisation in order to create these new unitaries, that could be a significant uplift for our residents at that point. Now, these are all hypotheticals, they're not definites, but the more information I see, the more it is crystallising about this being more expensive for local residents to operate because the government is refusing point blank to deal with the elephant in the room, which is that Hampshire County Council is heading to being bankrupt in short order. But we have the press in the room. Chris, have I said anything that's incorrect?
No, you haven't said anything incorrect, Leader.
Thank you.
So a lot of people out there will be looking at the Portsmouth assets, which we've done very well with, which Portsmouth people have invested in over 20, 30, 40 years now. And they could be looking at to sell them off. And that's where the money comes from, to do all these extra things in Portsmouth, like libraries, community centre, play parks, splash pools, supporting Hillsey Lido, supporting supporting the Hive, all these community things we do could just, if they sell off all those assets and we lose all the income from those assets, which is the cream or the icing on the cake for Portsmouth, that could all go. And I just don't know how people are going to understand this because they just don't seem to get it right at the moment. I know it'll happen and they'll all be cross, but...
And tellingly, they won't just go for us, but they'll be going for Fareham, Gosport and Havant as well. So all of their residents are going to be equally disadvantaged because there isn't the money in the system to deal with this problem. It does not exist. So the services, the discretionary services that people in Fareham, Gosport, Havant and Portsmouth value and rely on, such as our events programme, the amazing event we deliver for Remembrance Sunday every year, the fact that we have community wardens here, the fact that we have free entry museums, the fact that we have 9 libraries, all of these things are directly at risk because other than retaining one library, there is no statutory requirement to deliver any of those services. So if we inherit an enormous structural deficit on day one, all of the discretionary services across Portsmouth, Fareham, Gosport and Havant would have to be cut in order to meet that budget gap. And once they are gone, they will never come back. So not only will we lose all our discretionary services, if those numbers that we're using, which the county have produced, are correct, and the government does not step in, we will not even be able to afford to deliver statutory services on day one of a new authority. That is where we are.
And all the voluntary groups that we rely on so much will also suffer.
There'll be no money for the voluntary. No. There'll be no money for anything other than delivering poorer quality statutory services than we currently deliver. Darren?
Well, thank you for that not very cheery analysis, but it is realistic, I think. There will be people who will say, well, all you have to do is just go on an efficiency drive. You can make tens, hundreds of millions of pounds of savings each year, both for you and for Mr. Ward. Based on the analysis that you two are looking at, is that right?
Well, the question's right. The answer's no. We will not be able to do that. There will be, undoubtedly, there will be. It's called a dividend from collapsing 2 tiers of local government across the bits of Hampshire that are not currently unitaries. but we've already been a unitary throughout that period of austerity, going back over 15 years now, and we have made those decisions already. In fact, I'm looking at a draft report that's on my desk at the moment, which is part of our submission that we've got to get on the 26th of September, and I've added in the bits that say that Portsmouth has already made these decisions. We've already done that. So Southampton, so's the Isle of Wight. So we've taken over 110 million pounds out of our budget over the last 15 years. Is it realistic to say that Portsmouth's contribution to solving this revenue deficit that we'll inherit from Hampshire is proportionate to Fareham, Gosport and Havant? No, it is not, because we've already taken those two-tier savings because we are a unitary council. They are not, Fareham, Gosport and Havant, so there will be some saving there. But it's completely different, for example, than East Hampshire, Winchester, Test Valley and the New Forest combining, where all of that area is two-tier, and therefore there is a greater potential to make savings because of efficiencies made by collapsing the county layer with the district and borough layer. But we are a big chunk of what would be a South East Hampshire unitary, as Southampton are a big chunk of what would be a Western Solent, Western Hampshire unitary, and therefore those savings are very different. So when you start looking at the numbers that need to come out, you need to look at them through the lens of Portsmouth and Southampton in particular having already made a big chunk of those savings, which means the bit that gets pushed onto the pressure will be really on those former two-tier layers as they come in. So it's possible that we will see an even greater level of cuts required from the discretionary services in Fareham, Gosport and Havant than we will in Portsmouth, because we've made tough decisions already. So if any of those residents are listening and thinking that this is all going to be okay, it is not going to be all okay unless the government put their hand in their pocket to the tune of £200 million plus by 2028, 2029. Any more for any more? I'm going to apologise to Stephen Mark for the fact that that went pretty left field from where you'd intended. I think it's safe to say that everybody's relatively relaxed about your end of things. We're less relaxed about what the implications of it may be for Portico more widely. So, colleagues, we have recommendations that we approve the company's annual budget for the financial year 25-26 and note the forecast for 26-27 and 27-28 as set out in Appendix A, and that we note the likely drawdown of 5.5 million from the 28.6 million loan facility previously approved and within the Council's existing capital programme. Any drawdown, of course, will be subject to meeting the necessary criteria, including approval by the Council's Section 151 officer, that's Chris Ward, and that we note that this is the first budget for approval following a full independent review of the company by external consultants in 2024. Is that also approved? In that case, Stephen Mark, thank you very much for being with us today. You can now return off to run the company, which is the important bit, and thank you for being here. Okay, now we're back to, it seems to be all we talk about at the moment, we're back to the money again, and this time we're back with Chris, who can expound to us about Treasury Management Outturn Report 2024-25 and some supplementary questions from the Cabinet, no doubt, about what the implications for all that will be after we do local government reorganisation.
Thank you, Leader. Similar to the introduction to the last one, just a few highlights because nothing extra to update on the report. So this report is your report on the Treasury management activities for the last financial year. The report's already been to Governance Audit Standards and it is due to go to full council for approval, so it's for endorsement by yourselves. All of the information contained within here is based on our unaudited accounts. So whilst the financial year has ended, our accounts are yet to be audited. So this is based on unaudited accounts, but it is best practice for us to report at this time. Pleased to say that all of the activities have been performed within the prudential indicators that you have previously approved, and that this reports on the council's, it reports on its borrowing activities and on its investment activities. And I think the points to note throughout the report, if you take borrowing first, underlying need to borrow, 974 million, quite significant. Actual borrowing, much less. Actual borrowing is 709 million. The difference of 265 million is the reliance on what we call internal borrowing, or what you might more readily understand as the council's reserves that are held, and they are used temporarily to avoid borrowing, but that can only be done for a short to medium term period until those reserves are required. The rationale for that is because, as you'll have seen in the report, long-term borrowing rates have been on the rise. So it's not necessarily a sensible idea to lock into long-term borrowing when interest rates are high, and it is more prudent to use your internal resources until such time as longer-term borrowing rates start to fall. In terms of investments, points to note are that, as I mentioned at the outset, we are both a borrower and an investor, and that's the natural course of things in terms of managing the cash flows of a large organisation. We had, at the end of the year, £248 million worth of investments. You will know that much of that is vested on the London money markets and in products such as money market funds. There's a whole framework around that to ensure that, in the first instance, the council's investments are secure, and yield is our last consideration. Security is our first consideration, and yield on those investments is our final consideration. You'll note that investment rates have been falling. They tend to follow bank base rates. Bank base rate fell from 5.25% at the start of the year to 4.5% currently. Interestingly, our return on our investments has been 5.16%, so really outstripping the level of investments driven almost by base rates. In terms of the total cost of our treasury management activities, probably worthy of note that from the general fund's perspective, that's £9.7 million. Now that includes the amount that we set aside for the repayment of debt, so it's all of our treasury activities, including the amount we set aside for repayment of debt. And for the housing revenue account, it's 9.1 million. I think that's a fairly summarised position of the overall report, Leader.
Thanks, Chris. Before I go to Cabinet colleagues, just one thing I think I'd pretty much do this every year, so I'm going to do it again. When you say we're using other internal resources instead of borrowing, that's not because we've got tens of millions of pounds sloshing around doing nothing that we can choose what we want to do with. That is money that is allocated to other projects but not required yet. Yeah.
That's exactly right. All of the funding that the council has got is allocated for a purpose. It's just not needed right now. So on a temporary period, we're able to use that until such time as it is needed. And the time that it is needed will be the time that we have to go out and increase our borrowing.
Understood. Thank you. Colleagues, I also forgot, Councillor Dorrington joined us part way through. Nick, have you got any declarations of interest to do with any item on the agenda today?
No, none at all.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, on Treasury Management, are there any questions or comments?
I'd just like to, if I may, thank Mr Ward for managing this really well for the council, and it brought considerable advantages to taxpayers in Portsmouth. But, you know, I won't go over the so-called local government reorganisation reform. We all understand it in this room. It's how it impacts the people that we've been representing for such a long time. And it grieves me enormously that Portsmouth is going to be raided by the government to sort out financial mismanagement in other places that Portsmouth residents have not incurred. And all the effort that you've made, Chris, and all the liberal approach that we've taken to our money and investments will just be used to sort out the problems that have been stacked up from other places for way too many years. And they have had the advantage, the political advantage, of saying we've kept the council tax down. You know, and that's seen successive councillors get back in to their positions on behalf of their party, and now the chickens are coming home to roost. But not for them. It's going to fall on the council taxpayers of Portsmouth. They're going to lose services, most likely, and see their council tax go up to sort out the problems from elsewhere. We don't have these problems here, thanks to Mr Ward and a marvellous team we've had here and the progressive way the council's approached these things. I'm not going to wax on about that, but, you know, it really does grieve me. You know, I joined, Portsmouth got its independence and probably going to leave as it's taken away by this crazy Labour government.
Quite right. Councillor Mason and then Councillor Winnington.
Comment on the question. The comment is that I would echo the comments made by my colleague, Councillor Hunt, that we owe our low council tax, and I think we are probably the second lowest in the south of England in terms of council tax. We're very low anyway. Two, the way in which our finances have been managed over the years. It has been very successful. Thank you very much. The question, I suppose, is in these volatile times, do you see any problems with continuing our borrowing and investing in the way in which we are doing, or is volatility likely to force a change upon you?
Yeah, the geopolitical climate is always a difficult one to call, and what tends to happen when tensions rise is there's what's called a flight to safety, and what you will tend to see then is in normal times you'll tend to see long-term interest rates for the major developed economies fall because they're seen as safe havens. Traditionally that's the US, but we're not quite seeing that at the moment. Longer term interest rates in the US are rising, and I think the UK is looking like a relative safe haven, but it will be largely determined by national policy, and it will be largely that the level of interest rates that local authorities are likely to pay is always linked to government borrowing levels, and it will be the security of the overall national position that will determine what local authority borrowing levels will be. So if UK PLC becomes very, very indebted compared to the usual measures are compared to GDP, gross domestic product, then you will see interest rates rise. If the national finances are on a better trajectory, you'll see rates fall. I can't predict what's going to happen, of course, but I think the general point is volatility tends to lead to the flight to safety for the major, lesser indebted nations.
I've got a question, Chris. And it does, unsurprisingly, regard to local government reorganisation. We have taken decisions on borrowing money to invest in various bits and pieces in the council, building stuff, investing in things like Lakeside, etc., over a number of years. If a new authority that included Portsmouth was as cash-strapped as it appears it will be, and therefore has to sell off things earlier than a return on investment comes through, what would be the impact on how much money additionally would that potentially lose our investment strategy? What would it cost us compared to what it might actually do if it came to the end of the investment period and the maturity, so we'd effectively have sweated our asset out to the fullest extent?
I think what you would find in any situation like that, you would find rational decision making taking place in any situation like that. So, it wouldn't be rational to sell off a highly performing asset when the alternative would be, if it was an exceptional financial support situation, borrowing money. So, because you wouldn't sell off an asset that was highly performing, that could, let's just say it's achieving a 10% return, where the alternative is to take borrowing, say, at 5%. The irrational decision would be take borrowing at 5%, because that's the most opportune way to try to resolve the situation. So I don't foresee a situation where assets that are very high yielding would ever be sold off, because there'd be a lower cost alternative to the authority at that time.
Does that even, would that still be the case under, say, a Section 114 or something like that?
Yeah, it would be, because exceptional financial support, as the leader mentioned earlier on, comprises two basic things. It's a combination of increases in council tax and the ability to use capital funding, whether that be borrowing or the sale of assets, to fund revenue, any revenue gap or revenue deficit that you have. But obviously that's one-off funding, it's not ongoing funding, so you still have to make ultimately have to make the savings to balance your revenue budget. So it's only there as a cushion, so a short-term fillip to the gap that you have.
Thanks. So, yeah, it's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because we've been talking about some of our financial assets that we've invested in. Portsmouth City Council taxpayers' money is invested in these things, and as Councillor Pitt has mentioned, a lot of the problems that are going to occur are going to be if we went in with an authority which included our closest neighbours, that they would have probably even more of an issue in terms of a gap, because they would still have to make their additional savings in terms of moving from two-tier to single-tier structure. So effectively, some of our high-yielding investments, which would include things like the port, has been mentioned, etc., would perhaps be bailing out those other areas as well. So again, Portsmouth taxpayers would be filling a gap of surrounding areas, and also because and thinking about assets that are being invested, I have to think locally as well. So not just thinking about Portsmouth, but thinking about other things that might be at risk. So if there's anyone from Fareham watching, unlikely that it is, they've just invested a huge amount of money in Fareham Life, which is their wonderful new facility they've got there, which is a real asset to their town and their borough. But that could be first on the line to be sold off as well, because the government will not address the funding gap. I think this is an excellent report, and actually this is probably something for us to crystallise when we're facing this spectre of local government reorganisation, because this actually shows the absolutely prudential and prudent way that we've managed our finances in the city, and credit goes to Chris and all of his team, but also credit goes to this administration and all administrations of this council over at least the last 40 years, because many of these decisions were made 40 plus years ago and since then. So this is this return we have every year is testament to what's been going on here on this council for decades, and that it becomes to the point of all of us asking these questions, being concerned about this, being concerned about the future for our city, being concerned about the fact that we do not want our citizens to be paying more money for worse services, is really come to this, and it is outrageous, quite frankly, and which is why 2 years' time we won't have a report like this. If the government has its way, we won't have a report like this, because we won't be able to, because it'll all be with the context of going into a new authority and probably those discussions already going on with the shadow authority about what we're going to have to sell off to make ends meet, or what massive cuts are we going to have to make ends meet? So, so again, this is a chance to people in government and to anyone who's listening, anyone who has any influence. We don't need to be part of this in Portsmouth. This is a thing that shows we don't need to be a part of this in Portsmouth. So hands off Portsmouth.
Maybe one or two more comments on this, because I don't want to continually rehash LGR on every single item. It's not fair on the officers.
I will and I won't discuss this. I'm interested in the debt. So our gross debt as of 31st of March is £709 million. It appears from the papers that we have a reasonable but not huge room to borrow further before we get to our limit. How, as part of just the due diligence that's done about before our LGR submission on 26th of September, which will no doubt not only have to look at the proposed deficit for any new authority, but also the debt as well. Do we yet have an idea of whether being forced to merge with other councils will make the debt position worse or better? And will we before the 26th of September?
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. You are right to make the distinction between deficit and debt. They are two different things. The deficit position is large, as has been well rehearsed in the conversation, and particularly as we get to 28-29, with whatever this area's share of the county council deficit will be. The debt levels of the county council are relatively small. Just as a comparator, in terms of the percentage of your debt to your funding levels, for Portsmouth it's around 11%. For the county council as a whole, it's around 2%. And similarly, I'm not aware that the surrounding districts of Portsmouth, so certainly Gosport, Havant, Fareham, their Fareham, I'm not sure about the Fareham position, their levels of debt are modest also. But it's the deficit position that is the important one. I think that's what will be the most difficult challenge that any new authority faces. The debt position will be nowhere near as challenging.
But we certainly won't be in a position, should we be forced into this by the government, to use that remaining headroom or gap that we have in our debt to bail out the significant deficit that's coming.
It's a possibility, but there would be headroom across the whole area. It wouldn't just be associated with Portsmouth, it would be headroom across the whole area. So if there's an acceptance by government for what is described as a capitalisation direction, that's effectively what it is. You're able to use borrowing or capital receipts for the purposes of revenue expenditure, then it will be something that's looked at across the whole area, and it could increase it would inevitably increase the overall indebtedness and debt levels of the whole area.
Darren, if it's helpful, there's also another part to this which we haven't talked about yet, and that is the actual cost of local government reorganisation itself. So over and above how those new local authorities end up on day one, vesting day, and the problems that they have to surmount, the government is not funding the cost of all this happening, which will be tens of millions of pounds across Hampshire, will also have to be borne by those new local authorities. So it is an absolute certainty that the amount of debt that the new unitaries have will go up as a direct result of LGR, because it's most unlikely that anybody's going to have the cash to just write a cheque to cover the cost of all of this, and there will be a payback period. So initially, at least, we will have to, in all likelihood, borrow the money to fund it and then pay it back from the structural changes that are miraculously going to happen around all of this as the the new councils are formed.
I mean, that to me, sorry, Steve, that sounds to me like a version of the Glazer takeover of Manchester United.
It's very similar.
And we do feel like Manchester United before the Glazers took over, and we know how brilliant that has ended up.
Anyone else? No? Okay, so we are asked to accept two recommendations. One, that the actual prudential and treasury management indicators based on the unaudited accounts as shown in Appendix B be noted. Also noting that there is an explanation of the prudential and treasury management indicators contained in Appendix C. And that two, we refer this report on to full council on the 23rd of September, which ironically is the same full council where we will be sending on our submission on local government reorganisation. Is that all agreed? Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. That brings us to item 8 on the agenda today, which is the Dementia Community Support Review, and Andy Biddle is with us to present.
Thank you, Leader. Bearing in mind your mission at the beginning, people have read the reports. I'll just give a very brief summary. So the report's here to inform Cabinet of the Integrated Care Board report that was presented to the Health Overview and Scrutiny Panel in June of this year for Cabinet to consider those recommendations. The recommendations are listed from the report to HOSP, but we've also got some additional recommendations there around engaging with some of our Portsmouth residents who are informal carers. There's some there about the timescales of the review and the ask of the ICB to consider drafting a dementia strategy for Portsmouth in the same way as they have for Hampshire. Section 3 sets out the background to the commissioning of dementia-related support in Portsmouth. We've tried to set that out in some detail because it feels quite complex going through different organisations, so that's why we've tried to set it out quite clearly. And that section also sets out the dementia specialist nurses who are part of the Remind service managed through the Rowans, and that's what brought this to our Cabinet members' attention because those posts are no longer there. Section 4 provides some context as to the challenges for organisations that came out of COVID, the ICB financial support that's been given around this area, and the difficulty with recruiting nurses through an organisation that doesn't have the clinical oversight of those posts. And that section also tries to set out our carers' concerns as they've expressed them to us. Section 5 gives a detail of the current service through Remind, its signposting function, and it also sets out some of the care engagement the NHS have undertaken in recent times, and that also sets out the background to the review that led to the report to HOSP and the recommendations that have come here, and the reasons that that's taken longer than was initially anticipated. And then finally, Section 6 details the aim of the Cabinet member meeting with our carers, which is happening next Tuesday, with ICB and PCC colleagues. That will discuss the review, the support available to people with dementia living in Portsmouth, and hopefully ensure that the carers' voice is heard in that subsequent review that we've been talking about. That's a brief summary of the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Andy. I'm going to ask Councillor Winnington if he wants to come in as Cabinet member.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously this is something that is close to my heart and we have been working on for quite some time. So just a bit of background as well. This is going back to the mental health review that was funded by governments, which we started in 2021. And one of the things that was lacking about that review was a dementia strategy, which was very overdue, and we kept pushing the ICB to work on it, and they finally did. And quite frankly, compared to where we feared it would be, it is significantly better and actually very positive in its point of view. I'd like to thank especially Anne and I can't remember the other lady's name. It's just gone from me at the moment. Anyway, our carers who have been to full council and to HOSP, who have been absolutely brilliant in terms of giving a real human touch about what this means to them as carers, the impact of losing their clinical nurse specialist from the Remind service when unfortunately Ryan's Hospice couldn't any longer support that service. Remind has a particular thing for me because I used to manage that service a few years ago. So this report is really key, and I would really, to colleagues, really sort of bring about the recommendations, about the fact of welcoming the report as a whole. It is positive, but it's really key, I think, in the additional recommendation number 4, 2.24, that timescales for the next phase of the review are rigid in the Tier 2, which was something that was very key that came out of HOSP, because we do need to make sure that the ICB do stick to what they're going to say. The really key thing for Portsmouth is that when we've had this from the ICB, when they've been writing this report, it's been about saying that what we do in Portsmouth is a model for what they want to see elsewhere in Hampshire. So the biggest fear we had was about levelling down, and this is about levelling everyone else up, at least to us, and then moving beyond and actually moving to something much further. And indeed, something that I was having my catch-up with the Director of Public Health and Andy as Director of Adult Social Care earlier was actually about we are putting a bid in locally for the Neighbourhood Health Service pilots. And it's that kind of work where we can get this kind of work into dementia support embedded into our health service locally. So not just about having a service that provides things like that, which is absolutely the right way to do, and that's part of this recommendation for the Integrated Care Board, but it's also about how we can permeate that into these new integrated health service, which is a neighbourhood health service rather, which is what the government has put through in their 10-year plan. Dementia is in the 10-year plan as well, and it is something that is important. We are on this ever upgoing spike of people with dementia as we're hitting the baby boomers spike, and we're on the way up on that at the moment. So this is a really, really key bit of work, but I think we've got the right ways of going about it with this, but we as a local authority have to hold the ICB's feet to the fire. We owe it to all of our people with dementia and all of their carers and the people who've cared for people for dementia in the past, where unfortunately their loved ones and their friends and family that they looked after are no longer with us, and also for everyone who will be a carer of someone with dementia and someone with dementia in the future, because we know there are going to be more of those that come along. So it's a really key bit of work. I'd like to thank our carers again. I'm looking forward to talking to them next week, and then in the next full council meeting in the autumn, we will be bringing back another notice of motion, which will be in place of the one that we put on hold earlier this year, when we will be coming back, and so all members of this authority in full council can give their opinions and their recommendations on this, which I hope will parallel what's in this report. But as I say, I'm pleased with the report, but it needs to be implemented, and we owe this to our people in this city and to everyone who cares for people with dementia, both in Portsmouth and the rest of the Hampshire Isle of Wight.
Thank you, Matthew. Anyone else on this one? No? Okay. In which case we have a series of recommendations in front of us. I'm not going to read them all out. It will take ages. They are, for anyone watching online, in the published papers. But the first recommendation is, 1, do we accept the recommendations of the ICB report? Agreed. And then under 2.1, there are some further recommendations headed under 1A, B, and 2, 3, and 4. Are all of those agreed? And then under 2.2, there are some additional recommendations noted as 2, 3, 4, and 5. Are they all agreed? Okay, colleagues, thank you very much. Andy, thank you for coming and being with us and presenting today. Okay, moving on to item 9. That's another exclusion of press and public. Are we happy to move forward on the same basis as before, but we do not discuss any of the numbers at all that are on the orange papers, nor any of its detailed content? We are, in which case we move to item 10, and on that basis the report will come to us from Matt Evans. Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. So I'm here today to introduce the Annual Property Investment Fund report, which runs from end of March 2024 to the end of March 2025.
Matt, I think you need the mic a bit closer.
Oh, apologies.
Because Councillor Hunt won't hear you because he's got the earpiece.
Is that better? Better, okay. Oh yeah, that's better. In terms of the highlights and summaries of the report, the current passing rent is 9.8 million, which is up 300,000 from the previous year. Rental levels have been consistent over the past 4 to 5 years at around those levels. The total rent collected to date in the fund is around 75 million. The net income to date is around 30 million. The current vacancy rate is less than 1%, and that's been consistent over the last few years again. To put that in perspective, there's circa 1.1 million square feet within the fund, not including those properties that are under development. And we have about 9,000 square foot of vacancy out of 1.1 million square feet. There are some tenant highlights for this year, specifically Waitrose at Crewe Kern, which is around a 50,000 square foot supermarket, have renewed their lease for another 15 years. And we have also the same Matalan up at Swindon have renewed their lease for another 15 years-ish, 14 years. Both of those are going to undertake a full refurbishment later this year, so that's positive. In terms of capital values across the fund, we have seen it's actually gone up this year. The general market has been quite flat in terms of the investment market, so our fund has definitely outperformed the overall market over the past year. From 2022 to 24, we saw a kind of falling market, but that's certainly flattened out over the last year, and there's definitely some positive, I think, positivity on the horizon for the general commercial property market over the next couple of years. We currently have 2 properties under development, which is one in Warrington, which is an industrial unit, one in Scrutton Street in central London, which is an office block, both to complete by mid-2027. At which point, obviously, they'll start to bring in income as well. So that's really the summary of the report. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Matt. I'm sure the irony of them coming into play in the mid-27 is not lost on Councillor Hunt, who will, of course, then say that means that money is going to benefit the new unitary authority and not us.
Yeah, that's right. And do you know what's getting me right now?
No, but we're about to find out.
You are. A report on the Newsies website by some bloke, a Hampshire County Councillor. I guess he's the leader. He's got a beard.
His name might help.
Well, he doesn't say in the report. They got a video of him. And he's saying here that this local government reform will go ahead, and all the moaning or groaning won't make the slightest bit of difference. I'll bet he's what he's saying. They bloody well got us into this mess, and I'm not surprised they got their beady eyes on all these assets which we've accumulated over the years through Tory incompetence in Hampshire. Everybody in Portsmouth is going to have to pay for it. So, moaning and groaning, what's he on about? He should keep his mouth shut.
Who is it? Well, we're...
How disrespectful to all the people in Portsmouth that some Hampshire Tory says that we're moaning and groaning because the people of Portsmouth are going to have to pay off their debt. And we're moaning and groaning. What a bloody cheek.
I don't disagree. Come and sit in some of the meetings I've had to sit in. Okay. Moving us back to the topic at hand, it's the Labour group leader. Oh, right, okay.
Oh, there you are. That explains it all, doesn't it? They've all been for it here. They're all for it in Hampshire. Well, they ain't going nowhere. I'll tell you that now, because they're finished in this area if they go along with this lark. And Toby can darn well tell them, You know, people are not going to vote for them, not in this city at least, when they go and do this to us. And him sat there up in Hampshire, not been doing the proper opposition that he should have done, told the Tories to account, and now we're in this fix. And the Labour are going to make the people of Portsmouth pay for it.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, Councillor Hunt, which is why at last week's full council meeting I had to take our own Labour group to task for the 5 utterly incorrect statements that they made on their Facebook page, implying that we had voluntarily signed up to this and it was only going to be a small expansion when in fact will be about 40% of the new local authority, that the government had said that they were going to have, that it was okay, we could be between 300,000 and 500,000 when they never said any such thing. We have lots of Labour councillors across the county and the country at the moment spinning this, and I genuinely don't think they understand the consequences of trying to persuade the public that this is all fine when there's a day of reckoning coming that nobody's going to be able to hide behind.
Do they not understand how can they do this without giving the people a vote? It's a massive, massive change to the way we do our democracy. And yet they won't give the people a vote. They won't give them even a say. They'll do a sort of consultation, which is going on. I've read the Hampshire one, which really is not a consultation at all. And how do they get away with it? I just don't understand it. I've been around local government for 30-odd years now, and I've never, ever, ever seen anything so undemocratic as what's going on now. It's, you know, it's moving us towards almost a totalitarian type state. You know, the government can just come in and impose all this debt on the people of Portsmouth. It's incredible.
Well, it may have slipped some people attention, but they'll have heard about the announcement last week that we're on the officially approved to be on the devolution priority programme, and the words that we used was that the statutory tests have been met. The statutory tests included the consultation that was held around devolution, separate to this, but another process that we're going through at the moment about us having an elected mayor, and the consultation that took place, of which we are only aware of one public event in the entirety of Hampshire, which happened to be in Portsmouth, but that we weren't even informed of until 2 days before it took place, so only a handful of people engaged with it. We don't know exactly what happened with the online consultation that accompanied it, because when we asked if they were going to publish the results of it to show how the statutory tests had been met, the answer was no. Just gets better and better, doesn't it? Bringing this back, though, to this report, colleagues, questions to Matt about this report, please. There are none. Everyone's happy with you, Matt. It's everyone else they're very unhappy with. So thank you for bringing it in. It's good that we do bring this here every year to show how the portfolio is performing. And actually, it's a really good example of something that wasn't what Liberal Democrats didn't instigate in the first place. It was instigated under the previous administration, but that we were honest enough to say this is actually a good thing. Interesting to note the reference though to the Waitrose in Somerset, which still gets quoted back to us on the doorsteps on a regular basis, which is what good communication with residents is all about. But we do note the opportunity for those additional 2 properties to come online, but with chagrin that the financial benefits of that will be passed to residents who are not involved in any part of this process, as well as the people of Portsmouth. Okay, everyone happy? Yes, so we're noting that. Thank you very much indeed. I just need to double check that I haven't missed any. No official recommendations that I need to sign off, so that's fine. Thank you both for being here today. That brings us to item 11 on the agenda, and that is the BSIP Capital Highways Programme, and Paul is now with us. Paul, I don't think you were here right at the start, so do you just want to introduce yourself before we go into the report, please?
Yeah, apologies for that. My name is Paul Walker. I'm Head of Passenger Transport.
Over to you then.
Thank you. This is just a report updating the overall capital programme. It approves amendments to the programme that was set out initially in January, schemes which have fallen into preliminary design and will go forward to further detailed design, and also a reserve set of schemes that have come about through consultation through the enhanced enhanced partnership programme. What we'll do is, as the schemes progress, we will then take those forward to Transport Cabinet decision day.
Perfect, thank you. Paul, Councillor Candish, would you like to come in as it's your area?
I'm going to say something very brief, which is a few years ago I used to write and talk about a bus revolution that was coming to Portsmouth. It's now really good to see that actually rolling through. In the first phase of these capital schemes, we have done some very good work already, and on the streets of Portsmouth now, there's a lot of work on bus stops, for example, that are going on that this is doing. I'd also like to call out the things that we are not doing. So people sometimes have the view that these schemes are conceived and then rolled out regardless of what people say or what further investigation reveals. And we've actually taken out a couple of schemes because they prove not to be offering a good cost-benefit ratio to the Portsmouth resident when we actually got into the real detail of it. A second round of funding was provided to the council just last year, and that has been immediately deployed into some other schemes that have been identified. And I think it's really good that we have this future look to be able to move to take on these additional prospects when additional monies come through. So, I mean, I just really want to thank Paul and the bus team for the results that we're getting on the bus service overall. The numbers of people who are using it going up, the satisfaction level of people overall is going up, and there is so much going on that I think we can have great confidence that we're going to see that occurring for some time to come.
Thank you, Peter. Members, any other questions or comments on this one? No, I think it's really good to see the update and know that we're heading in the right direction. Paul gave us a bit of a briefing earlier today about next steps in the future, and I think that the 4 pillars that this is built on are a very good foundation indeed, and a good model moving forwards. It's been transformational. I mean, it sounds like we've almost got used to hearing it now that Portsmouth, of all the cities in the country, has had the largest uplift in bus usage, and that we are above pre-pandemic levels, which is extraordinary, because that's certainly something that London hasn't achieved with all its vast resources available to it. So it is transformational, and it's continuing to be so. So members, we've got anybody else? No? No. So we've got some recommendations. We note the progress made to date on the Bus Service Improvement Plan Highways Capital Programme, that we approve amendments to the BSIP Highways Capital Programme set out in the report, including those schemes progressing into detailed design, and that we delegate authority to the Assistant Director of Transport to make minor amendments to the plan in consultation with the Enhanced Partnership Board and the Cabinet Member for Transport. Are we agreed with all 3 of those recommendations? We are. Paul, thank you for being with us today, much appreciated, and all those recommendations are agreed. Which brings us to, drum roll please, the last item on the agenda today, and that is agenda item 12. It's the HMO, which is Houses in Multiple Occupation, for anyone who doesn't know what that is who may be watching. Additional Licensing Scheme Independent Review. Just at the outset here, worth noting that not every local authority has an additional licensing scheme. Portsmouth does. We want to drive up housing standards. We know that residents do get frustrated by some of the issues that do come from some HMOs, most certainly not all. I used to be a councillor in the ward in the city that's probably got the most, Central Southsea, and certainly there were a percentage of complaints and issues related to HMOs, but it certainly was not all HMOs, or otherwise I would have literally been at it all day, every day, because we had hundreds of them in Central Southsea. So they are a vital part of our housing supply. While we are waiting for government to properly address funding so that we can get on and build our way out of the housing crisis. Remember, we have thousands of approved units in the city ready to start going either into detailed planning or in one case already through detailed planning, but we can't build them because the future rents still do not provide us with sufficient income to repay the borrowing. The government is obsessed with correcting planning, and it's not planning that's holding up house building, it's the lack of affordability to build new units for local authorities. That's what's holding it up. So until we can get into that process and start using that to bring down our waiting lists and the money that it's costing us to address the temporary accommodation crisis, then houses in multiple occupation are in many cases literally the only housing alternative available to our residents. And for those who don't like them, I would say do remember that it may be your children or grandchildren that rely on a house in multiple occupation to solve their housing problems, while local authorities like Portsmouth are waiting for governments to step up and enable us to do this properly. At the same time, we are extremely concerned about government proposals to take away from local planning authorities the ability to make decisions around HMOs, because making decisions at local planning authorities is one of the ways that we make sure that those HMOs, when they are delivered, are of a good standard. If we lose that control, then there will be a fight on our hands where the officers are having to really fight a rearguard action to make sure that room sizes and all the provision that's there to keep those residents safe and in a decent standard of accommodation actually exist. So there are some fundamental things going on here where we are at odds with central government over getting this right and delivering good housing for our residents. We acknowledge that some HMOs do cause problems for the residents, and additional licensing was brought in to make sure that we could hold landlords to account for not providing good quality housing for their residents and for not making sure that their residents live in those properties appropriately and respectfully within their communities. So it is absolute nonsense, as we sometimes see reported, that we are not doing anything about HMOs. We've done a vast amount around HMOs, but within our ability to do so through the National Planning Policy Framework. One vital part of that was reintroducing an additional licensing scheme, and that is what we're going to hear about today. So Claire and Sally, over to you.
Thank you very much. So there are no changes to the published report, so I will just run through some highlights as you indicated earlier. The purpose of the report is to present a recent independent review of the Council's additional licensing scheme, which has been undertaken by local partnership and supported by the Local Government Association, along with recommended actions arising from the review. We ask that Cabinet note the intention to publish this review, its findings and actions, and that Cabinet members thank the Local Partnership and Local Government Association for undertaking the work, and to the stakeholders that participated in the review. So following the introduction of the additional licensing scheme, the Council have elected to undertake an external validation exercise with the LGA's support. The request was for a peer review with key lines of inquiry as follows. So following PCC's introduction of additional licensing, we were seeking assurance that the enforcement policy and additional licensing application process and conditions are reasonable, whether the private sector housing team structure, management levels and training for the team is adequate to administer the additional licensing service, and a view and assessment on the need for planning to align their space and amenity standards to those applied by licensing. The review was fully funded by MHCLG and delivered through the LGA. The review was undertaken by local partnerships, and it was independent of Portsmouth City Council. The scope included engagement with stakeholders, which also included landlords. And the methodology formed two parts. So firstly, a review of documentation, and secondly, a series of stakeholder interviews. The assurance review concluded that PCC had undergone a comprehensive, robust process in developing the scheme. The local partnership concluded that Portsmouth is not an outlier compared to other councils, and that PCC has taken a more sophisticated approach than many councils in its design of the scheme. Overall, the review provides a positive assurance for the approach the council has taken in introducing additional licensing in Portsmouth. The report made 4 recommendations, all of which have been classified as recommended as opposed to being critical or essential. And the 4 recommendations are, firstly, that PCC should develop its plans for procurement of a new IT system for HMO licensing applications. The second recommendation is that PCC should establish a framework for the periodic review of licence conditions. The third recommendation is that PCC should review information which it holds, either historic or current, which would enable more communication on the existence of the scheme outside of the city. And the fourth recommendation is that at an appropriate point in the future, the council should conduct or commission a review of the impact of the introduction of additional licensing on the local housing market in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Councillor Hunt, did you want to come in? It's your area.
Yeah, indeed. So I'm going to talk about the enforcement aspect, and I'm sure Councillor Sanders will come in with the operation. So I want to be absolutely clear. First of all, I'd like to thank Claire and Sally for the enormous professionalism around all of this, and for their work with the PDPLA. They tend not to always agree with us, but the problem has been with HMOs, I think we do have to accept, Leader, that HMOs have been stigmatised now for a very long time, maybe going back 30 years. And the problem probably was, you know, it started in Baileys and Margate Road, where, you know, they're about 80 to 90% HMO. And because of that, people became fearful of them and what they represented, and, you know, noisy parties and all this sort of thing. So that form of housing, whether anyone likes it or not, is stigmatised, and we have to accept too that residents are very anxious, and every time they see a house coming up for example, in North End, if they see a house come up for sale, their worry is going to become an HMO. The only thing that we can ever say to him is we put in place this 10% rule in planning, and that is the only thing, apart from the licensing scheme, which controls them, because the government doesn't seem fit to, because since the World War, and I've said this over and over again, there's just not enough housing around, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. There's not enough housing around, and I was talking with the officers before, you know, young people, you know, if they're sending a kid to nursery, one child to nursery, is about £1,500 a month, and then everybody says, well, save to get a house. But how do you save to get a house when your rent with a, you know, as a young family could be £1,500 a month too? You know, and you're £3,000 before you even get going at the beginning of the month. I mean, how on earth does anybody survive in that? Then there, of course, there are people who are less well off, but it has to be accepted. We must accept, and we must also understand that residents don't want them near them. Whether we like it or not, they just don't. And as I say, it's been the stigma, and that's been bad rogue landlords for far too long. So we have set about, within this council, tackling these rogue landlords, and the news has very often and systematically printed stories of rogue traders when they are prosecuted by us, and they're frequently prosecuted, but of course they also given fixed penalties depending on what kind of breach they've made, anywhere between I think £12,000 and £30,000, and we've handed out £30,000, £35,000 fixed penalties before down in Summertown, I remember. So one thing that is true is that this council is tough on rogue landlords, but it doesn't fix all the problems, because the trouble is when bad tenants move in, we are entirely dependent upon the management of the premises. But the information that I'm given from officers is we can't insist on the behaviour of the tenants. It's down to the landlord to decide whether he or she or they want to remove the person. And I've got these problems in my patch right now. You know, a couple of houses behaving really badly, and people have lived there next door to a house that is now being used as an HMO, and the behaviour of the tenants is appalling. And I don't think and I mean, Claire can come back on this, but there's only so much that we can do. It's really a policing issue, but it's that low-level stuff, you know, going in through windows, smoking drugs, taking drugs, and worse than that. So we will bear down on rogue landlords and the letting agents. We have prosecuted them. We have taken them to the Crown Court, and they have been given hefty sentences, hefty fines, and including community service orders, and that's what we will continue to do. Anybody who operates an unauthorised HMO in our city will be tracked down, will be caught, and will be dealt with. And that's what we're doing at the moment. We are actively looking for people who are operating unauthorised HMOs, and we will find you, and you will be dealt with.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Sanders, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Steve. It's interesting because I've brought this in not once but twice. The circumstances that Lee and Steve have outlined aren't new. I brought this in 2013 because there was a crisis of confidence with people with regards to HMOs. All the issues you've raised were there then. And the idea was to drive up standards, to give people confidence, firstly, not just the neighbours, but also people on our waiting list. Time after time after time, we have people on our waiting list who advise, because of the lack of housing that we can't build in this city, to go private, as that's a way of dealing with moving. And time and again, they go no, because they're scared that landlords will kick them out for no reason. They're scared that the boilers will never get fixed. And they're scared that the sort of security of tenure that they want in a council house is for the birds in the private rented sector. Now, I rent privately. I even rent privately in a HMO. And I have a good landlord. I've said to the team previously, if every landlord in the city was like my one, we'd all be laughing. But they're not, as you've outlined, Lee. And some are good, and some really, really, really aren't. And that's why I brought in additional licensing in the first place. I say the first place, and I'll come back to why in a second, because that affects some of my responses. But certainly over the last couple of years, landlords have said essentially, this isn't right. This doesn't work. This is destroying our city. This, frankly, is chucking people on the streets. So that's one of the reasons, in response to this, why the team commissioned an independent organisation to have a look and see if it was all true. And the overwhelming answer is no. So let me give you an example. One of the criticisms we've had essentially is the process gone through this cabinet wasn't good enough. It wasn't backed up enough. There wasn't enough evidence. It wasn't robust. This report says it was. The second point they've raised is Portsmouth is an outlier. We're not the same as many other places. You know, we're all very different. Why don't you be like them? Well, this report says that actually it should be the other way round. Council should be more like us. And I quote from the report, PCC has taken a more sophisticated approach than many councils in the design of its scheme. For instance, it's decided to introduce a tiered approach to licensing, which means good landlords pay less. Enforcement policy is also more transparent than many others. That's not an outlier. It seems everyone else is an outlier except us. The next bit there says, oh yes, your space standards, they're far too big. We need to live in smaller homes. People can only live in smaller rooms. You've got no evidence for it. Conditions such as space standards were introduced based on a robust evidence base and introduced in a way that was not overly punitive and provided flexibility for landlords. Other councils are becoming more like us. That's good, because we want all councils to make sure that people can live in safe and secure accommodation. One of the frequent problems we get at planning committee and elsewhere is there's one rule for planning and one rule for licensing, and I have to say I've said that more than once at various committees. And they say, yes, this independent report says that there is an anomaly, but the planning and licensing regime ultimately are not designed to do the same thing. So therefore, there is no one set of standards that they recommend. And that's one of the reasons why we as an administration are incredibly angry that the Labour government wants to take away the right of people the voters can sack, namely us councillors, looking at HMOs, which we all know is the subject of incredible anger, frustration, sometimes based on misinformation, not always, but sometimes. Because we know it's about trust. And it's about making sure that people can trust these things. So basically it says that we're doing all right. All the criticisms I've had over the last 2 years or so are wrong. Not me, not council officers, but an independent organisation. It does make recommendations, and I just want to make some observations, Leader, about that. The first one, which is around the IT system, is thankfully not in my pay grade, but I'm sure Councillor Hunt will look at that significantly. The second is around a framework for the periodic review of licensing conditions. Well, additional licensing can only be brought in for 5 years at a time, and that means it may well go, if we do achieve an improvement, it may well go as it did the first time after 5 years, which is September 2028. It's just about the only thing on this agenda that is not affected by local government reorganisation. Alleluia, and praise the Lord. But if it is improved, then this will go. Licensing for large HMOs will stay as they stayed afterwards. So although I'm supportive of a periodic review, if we're forced to scrap it anyway, that may or may not be sensible, Lee. But that's up to you, mate. The third one, which is around the communication bit, I have no problem with at all, and I think communication is important based on honesty. The fourth point is the one that covers my role, which is around the housing market in the city, and in particular the impact of additional licensing in Portsmouth on the housing market in the city. Landlords regularly say, well, we're selling all these homes because of your additional licensing, and you're chucking people on the streets because of additional licensing. I don't believe that's true. What I do believe is important is a review of the housing market in the city as a whole, for two reasons. Firstly, because the new mayor will have control of strategic housing. And I want to know what that means. No one really knows what that means because the bill hasn't been published. But they have to do it on the basis of evidence. And I think a review of the housing market in the city is important. But I would also suggest that we look seriously, should we be forced into a shotgun marriage with other councils, not just in the city, but also in any new unitary authority area. And that's why I wouldn't suggest doing it now, Leader and Councillor Hunt, but actually to wait and see how the land lies in future. If we're staying on our own, that's absolutely fine. If we're forced to merge, that's something we'll have to look at. But I'm more than happy to look at the housing market in the city because we want to know if the sort of horror shows that you, Leader, outlined earlier are still true and what we need to do to change it. So on that basis, I welcome this report as a vindication of the decision this Cabinet took to reintroduce additional licensing, the work the officer team has done to make sure that it is okay and robust and sensible. I'm delighted other councils are following our lead as on this and on so many other things, and I would be delighted to have a review of the housing market in the city or any new area. Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Mason.
A brief comment following what we have heard today. The important thing with HMOs is that we should, as with all of our housing and planning, is that we should retain public confidence. And I think that the confidence of the public should be built by this report, which shows that we are maintaining and are determined to maintain very high standards. I think it is also, as you mentioned at the beginning, Leader, it is important that we retain confidence in the planning process, which is alongside this, that should be done in public, in front of the gaze of the press or anybody that cares to watch, and not hidden away as the current government proposals seem to suggest. We must retain the confidence of the public by all means. Thank you.
Completely agree with you. any more on this one? It is a noting report. Colleagues, are we happy to note it, and people broadly happy with the pursuit of the recommendations that came back as part of the review? Yeah, okay. Claire and Sally, thank you very much for being here today. Colleagues, there being any other business? No, in which case the meeting is now closed. Thank you very much. And anyone watching online, thank you for joining us.